Hey guys, welcome back to the Modern Catholic Life podcast. I'm your host, Dallas, and we've got a special guest today, James Caldwell, host of the Manly Catholic podcast. And at the end of this, we'll talk about where you can find James and the Manly Catholic on social media. We'll put links in the description. But James, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Hey, Dallas, it's great to be here. I'm doing very well. How are you?
Awesome. Good. Thanks. So the topic for today is getting married in the Catholic Church. And before we started recording, James and I were just sharing how we both have kind of different, but still similar experiences and perspectives on getting married in the Catholic Church. James married someone who is Catholic, and I am marrying someone who is not, but I'm Catholic. And so we'll kind of share our experiences a little bit because no doubt about it, getting married in the Catholic Church is different than getting married not in the Catholic Church. And there's hoops that we've got to jump through, a lot of stuff we got to do, a ton of things on the checklist. But before we get into that, I was on James' podcast not too long ago, The Manly Catholic. And so, James, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background, how you started on your platform, where you started, and then what you want to accomplish through the Manly Catholic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a long story, so I'll keep it short. But as Dallas mentioned, I was born and raised Protestant. Grew up in Southern California, actually. Grew up a non-denominational Friends Christian out in Southern California was the name of the church I went to with my family. Grew up there, great school. And then I met my wife, which I'll get into that in a little bit as well. But basically entered the Catholic Church in 2018. So it'll be 4 years this coming Easter. And basically, when I entered the church, it was kind of a long process for me. And I basically, when I entered the church, I basically told God, I want to do something for you, essentially. And becoming Catholic was such a momentous change in my life for the better that I felt like I needed to give back in some way. And that being said, I've loved podcasts. I travel a lot for work. I'm a home health physical therapist, so I'm always in my car. So I always listen to podcasts and things like that. And I was like, I wonder if I could start a podcast, but like, what would it be about and things like that. So
if you do one with physical therapy, I'm definitely a listener because I've got a ton of back problems. So you can help me out.
There you go. Yeah. Maybe that could be a show in the future, perhaps.
Yep.
Yeah, so we moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan in 2020, so like the height of COVID. And Father Dominic just got ordained actually July of 2020 as well. And so he has a very interesting story. I'll just have to do a podcast episode on his background story. It's pretty remarkable. But anyway, so we met at our parish, St. Robert's in Ada, Michigan, which is kind of right next door to Grand Rapids. And we pretty much hit it off right from the get-go. I told him I was looking for someone to do spiritual direction, and he happened to, that's like right up his alley. And, we really hit it off pretty much, like I said, from the start. And we just started talking more about personal things and kind of our passions, what we really enjoy. And authentic Catholic masculinity is one, and just true love for the church was another thing. And so I basically was praying about it for, gosh, probably like a good year and a half. Like, God, what do you want me to do? I feel called to doing a podcast, but like, what the heck is it going to be about?
Yeah.
And so, so I basically did this on a whim. I just said, hey, Father Dom, like, I want to start a podcast. This is what I think it'll be about. Would you be interested in joining? And so he said he'll pray about it. And he ended up kind of saying yes to it. And then it just has kind of taken off from there. And I mean, our biggest goal, to put it quite simply, is to make fathers saints. And that's kind of our mission statement. And so kind of in our first few episodes, we dive into the Breach by Bishop Olmsted, his exhortation for men. And he talks about in there, like, every man is called to be a father in some way. So when you think of our mission, it's to make fathers saints. It's like, well, that's kind of, doesn't include everybody. Actually, it does, because every man is a father in some way, whether you're biological, adopted, or you just mentor young boys. You're a father to somebody.
Sure.
And so, and it was funny too, I read somewhere that there are not many like lay fathers who are actually saints. Usually we think of a bunch of priests and things like that, but there's only like a handful, maybe, I mean, more than a handful, but there's not a
Not
ton
as
of
many.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, certainly not as many as, because we think of, priests or theologians or doctors of the church and stuff like that, but just having like a lay father. So long story short, it just kind of came into the fact that masculinity, especially Catholic masculinity, is kind of under fire in this day and age in our culture and our society. And so, if not me, then who? Even if it only affects 5 people. I mean, honestly, Father Dom and me talked about this, is this, if we do this for 10 years or 5 years, if we change one person's life and it causes them to create ripples into their community, we don't care. I mean, we love doing this. It's such a passion of ours. And like I said, the more men we can reach, we fully believe in what we're doing. We think it's, totally authentically Catholic. So we're driven by that message and trying to reach as many men as possible.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And thank you for doing that. And it's such a commendable feat that you are, pursuing, like to make fathers saints. And just to kind of kick us now into the topic for today, before you're a father, you're a husband. And so you specifically, can you tell us a little bit about how you met your Catholic wife as a non-Catholic?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my wife is Betsy, and she is an amazing woman. So we met actually in physical therapy school. Like I said, I'm a home health physical therapist. So we met out in California. So she's from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and she flew out to California for physical therapy school. And we met at a small private Christian college out there. And we were in the same class, and there was about 44 of us. And it's fun fact, I always tell people this. So we were friends probably the first year and a half, and kind of to the tail end of the part of the year, we became really close and things like that. And then I asked her out, and she said no the first time.
They always do. The smart ones always do.
See, yes. But see, then it makes us as men like, okay, she's tough to get. Okay. So she said no, but then like 6 months later, I asked her again, and then she said yes. And I mean, the rest is history. We just, obviously going Catholic to non-Catholic. I mean, we had those conversations, which I know we'll get into in a little bit, but I mean, as a Christian too, as a Protestant, I don't think I realized how big of a deal it was to marry a non-Catholic, just because, again, like we'll be talking about kind of the restrictions, the rules, like you're guaranteeing that the children are going to be raised Catholic and things like that. So for me, as a Protestant who's pretty much more laid back and kind of liberal with it, it was, okay, like whatever, I'm marrying a Catholic, who cares? Like we're both Christians, we both believe in Jesus, whatever. But no, there's quite a bit of differences. So, but yeah, I met Betsy in PT school, and we got married in 2017 in July. So we're coming up 5 years this year. So yeah, 2 little boys, and yeah, it's been a whirlwind. So
that's awesome, man. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
As someone, I'm going to say from the outside looking in,
yeah,
you thought, okay, no big deal. We both love Christ. We're both believers. We're both Christians. So, what's the big deal? Once you started to, I guess, become aware of all the things you had to do, what were your thoughts? How did you process that? And was that before you, it was before you got married. Yeah. So how did you process that?
So I think for me, the biggest difference was how serious the Catholic Church takes marriage. I mean, they take it seriously, obviously, in Protestant churches too, but like when in our marriage prep, it was always centered around Jesus first. Okay, so Jesus in the church first. Okay, and then your relationship with your wife, and then if you have children, your children after that. And so in Protestants, they have it, of course, around Jesus as well, but it's more about the relationship between the two. But in the Catholic Church, for me at least, my kind of biggest takeaway was the sacramental aspect of it, where when you are joined as one flesh, it's Jesus actually that is joining you two. So you two actually become one, and Jesus has to be at the center.
Yeah.
I mean, without Jesus at the center, your marriage is going to flop. It's going to fail. I mean, we can talk about the divorce rates and how crazy it is now, but I think just the fact that divorce is so frowned upon, and for Betsy and me too, we kind of talked about this in our marriage prep, was that divorce was never even going to be like an option on the table. Like we both said it, like no matter how bad things get, we're just not even going to bring it up because that is just absolutely impossible. And as a man, you think about marriage, you talk about marriage, and then you don't realize it until you're up there on the altar saying the vows, like, okay, like this is real.
Yeah,
this
I'm
is for
locked in.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, in my opinion, the seriousness of marriage has just completely kind of gone out the window. Another thing too, Catholic Church is it has to be married in the Catholic Church, versus as a Protestant, you can be out on the beach, out in the forest, and it's still valid. But I mean, in the Catholic Church, it has to be in the church. And that, I mean, people think that's restrictive, but I find such beauty in that, because the church is where, the pinnacle of our faith is the Eucharist. Mm-hmm. And all the sacraments, if you think about kind of most of the sacraments, they are done in the church. So why wouldn't we get married in the church as well? Right. So I think those were kind of the biggest things, was the seriousness of it, the seriousness of divorce, and also being married in the church were probably the biggest takeaways for me.
Yeah. So you talked about kind of the Eucharist being, I guess, the source. And so getting married in the same places where the source is makes sense. Mm-hmm. But before you adopted that Catholic belief that the Eucharist is mm-hmm. Jesus's body, blood, soul, and divinity, how did you process, I guess, the restriction or the limitation of, if you're going to get married, you have to get married inside the church? I know weddings are more, I guess, stereotypically thought of and planned out by the woman, but did you have an idea or a plan to get married somewhere else?
Actually, I did not. I always thought I was going to get married in the church. My oldest sister got married in a church as well. So, and my parents did. So I guess I just kind of thought that's just what you did. Like I went to weddings where it wasn't in a church, yeah. But I guess in the back of my mind, I always thought, if this truly is the joining of a man and a woman, and if it's truly Christ at the center, it needs to be done in a church where Christ is dwelling. Yeah. So for me, I never had an issue with that, just because I never had like an expectation or a dream of, we're going to get married at, right, in the middle of the woods or things like that. Because I've been to weddings and they're absolutely beautiful. But to me, that just really wasn't something I was interested in personally.
Sure. And I want to come back to something that you said about the joining of man and woman inside the church. But before we get to that, what was your, because I understand it's different by diocese. So what was your experience with marriage preparation? What were the things that you had to do? And then I'll share a little bit about what I'm going through right now.
Yeah, so we got married in Colorado. Actually, we lived in Colorado for 2.5 years. So it's the Archdiocese of Denver. And so we had to do the 1,000 questionnaire that they give out.
Yeah, I remember that.
We can talk about that. That was intense. We did, so this, I don't know if this is the same in your diocese, but they had us do it's called an Engaged Encounter Weekend. So we actually went to the St. Pope John Paul Center in Denver, and it started Friday night, and it was Friday night all day Saturday, and then most of the day on Sunday. And so you had men and women were roommates with other men or other women. So obviously it was because the sexes were separated, mm-hmm. But it was just like a boot camp of marriage prep. And so they had a host family, essentially a husband and a wife, and they had, I think, another couple as well. And they would just pretty much give talks, but they would also have a booklet that you went through with your spouse or your future spouse. And again, it was great because it was conversations that you never even would have thought of having? Like you think of, okay, like obviously we're going to talk about children. Okay. But you never think about, okay, so how are you raised? How is,
Yeah.
how are arguments handled in your family? What are kind of like your comfortable communications, or what do you not like about how you were raised about your family? For children, how do you want to raise them? It's those things like that. Like, how are we going to divide the roles? And
Yeah.
then even get into like, yeah, like sexuality and things like that. What is being brought into that
Was this the booklet that
aspect
you
of
guys had?
it. Was not
Okay.
fully
Uh,
engaged. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to bring mine out, but
That's
it
okay.
was a phenomenal weekend. Um, so yeah, that was kind of our experience. So it was a really long questionnaire, and then we met with the deacon that was gonna oversee our marriage. So we went over the questionnaire with him. And funny thing about that is when Betsy and me did it, we had like totally opposite answers. Okay. And Betsy was like freaking out. She's like, I thought we talked about this. And like you said, you're over here. I'm way over here. And so, but it's totally different between men and women, right? So, like, one of the questions was, um, I forgot a specific one, but it was just basically, did you guys talk about like how your children were going to be raised? And like the way they word it, it's pretty vague. And then the answers are like, yes, we talked about it, but like not that much. Yes, we are firmly on the same page about this. Or no, we're totally in disagreement. But what I did, I always erred on the side like we talked about it, but we were never like set in stone about certain things, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So it was discussed, but in my opinion, I didn't think we like nailed down anything. But Betsy's like, we talked about this, and so it truly was just like a misunderstanding. We both answered the question similarly, but again, men and women differences. But it was great because then it led to more conversation. So
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like our questionnaire is pretty similar, but yours, you said it was vague, but it sounds like it was not as vague as mine was,
yeah.
because mine was yes, no, I don't know. And so there was those were the
Oh,
three options.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, and the questions are kind of vague,
yeah.
and they can be interpreted in different ways. And so
Mhm.
we had the option of going to that marriage couple retreat thing, but
Mhm.
we also had the option to forego that and instead have a sponsor couple that we met with, uh,
Oh,
gosh,
nice.
probably, I don't know, half a dozen times for like a few hours each session, and where we basically covered the same things that you discussed. But yeah, it's such a good conversation starter because, Emily and I, my fiance, we've been together for over 5 years now. So naturally those topics have come up. But in terms of actually solidifying, here's what we're going to do, here's what we're not going to do, we didn't always come to those things on our own. But we definitely came to plenty of solutions or resolutions while we were meeting with our sponsor couple. But such a good conversation starter to clear things up before you enter into that permanent relationship.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's again, and that's the thing about these engaged encounters or having a sponsor couple. It's they've done it before.
Yep.
It's like so they understand the questions that you had no idea going into it, and the things that can make or break a marriage. So like children is a huge thing, and I mean, there are couples out there who literally like don't have an honest conversation with each other about, do you want children?
Yeah.
And then it comes up 3-4 years down the road, it's like, you don't want children? Like, like, no, I never wanted children, like we never talked about that. So it's just things that literally can make or break you. And same thing with Betsy and me, coming from, and same with you, Dallas, is coming from a Catholic and a non-Catholic perspective. I mean, you really have to have a, a, a firm conversation with your future spouse about, how are we going to make this work? Like, are you totally against Catholicism, or are you totally against Protestantism?
Mhm.
What are the things that you don't like about Catholicism? Like, is this a deal breaker for you? Because religion is something that, it again, it makes or breaks marriages if you don't have those conversations. I mean, some people make it work where there's a Catholic and a non-Catholic, and they
Mhm.
live 60 plus years together in a marriage, and it's very fruitful. But I'm sure they had extremely difficult conversations about it.
Yeah, you got to talk
And you
about it
have
for sure.
to.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
going back to tell me the name again of it, where you went on the weekend thing.
it's the Engaged Encounter Weekend.
Engaged encounter. So did
Yeah.
you feel awkward or uncomfortable maybe going into it or while you were there at all, like not knowing what you were getting into?
I definitely didn't have any expectations, but I think just being there with Betsy, I don't feel like I was uncomfortable at all. And we met actually a really good couple that ended up becoming really close friends down in Colorado. So it actually was a pretty blessed weekend, to say the least. But yeah, it was great because they make you feel really comfortable. And the talks again are in a group, and then you break off with your partner, and
Yeah.
then you go and have like quiet time, and you journal, and then you come together, and then you talk about the answers. So
Yeah.
I don't know, how was it with you?
Well, just first, like we said, those talks are deep. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna skim through my booklet real quick.
Mhm.
Chapter 1, differences. 2, division of labor, recreation, family of origin, communication, conflict resolution, Catholic
Mhm.
identity, finances, intimacy, infertility and adoption. That's a huge one. Catholic
Mhm.
parenting, vocation and career, and then the sacrament of matrimony. Like those are really, really deep things. And we got these booklets first before we met with the couple, and we were like, this is going to be really uncomfortable. This is going to be really awkward. Are they going to be judgmental? Because you never know, and we're all capable of this, of judging others. Like, uh,
Yeah.
so like you're unsure. We were unsure of like what kind of couple are we going to get. Luckily, we got the nicest, the kindest individual. I mean, they were just awesome. They made us feel really, really comfortable. They allowed us to talk rather than lecture us. They didn't probe to the point where it was bothersome, but they did it enough to get Emily and I to talk about things that, we needed to clear. And so
Yeah.
it was overall a really good experience. And from Emily's perspective, especially with her being not Catholic, so far she's like, this is the best part of it. There's a lot of
Wow.
emailing and phone calls and trying to chase people down with all the information that you need. And that's not fun, and especially for her because uh, during the last few months, she's been the one spearheading all of it, which I appreciate greatly because she's not even the Catholic one. I am. But yeah, she said of all the things that we have to do, the sponsor couple so far has been the best because of the conversations that we are, when I say forced to have, not in a bad way, but that we're encouraged to have.
Yeah. Yeah. That you need to have.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's it, man. Well, so making that transition from
Mhm.
single life to married life, what was that like for you? You got rejected at first. So did I. Luckily,
Oh,
only
right.
6 months later did she say yes to you. Mine waited 4.5 years. So
Wow. So you
yeah,
had to break it down.
yeah. Well, I had some growing up to do. So
There you go.
yeah. But so
That's
what was
usually
that
how it is.
transition like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, it's obviously tough, but I think you are so excited that it's I mean, it's totally worth it. But for me, the realization, because when we moved from California to Colorado, and that was actually the first time I had left. I was the first one in my family really to leave kind of the nest in Southern California. So that was a big change, to leaving from my family away and then being joined to my wife. And then kind of having a realization that, like, oh my gosh, she is relying on me to provide for her, to protect her, and things like that. So it wasn't even like losing my free time, like that freedom where I can literally do whatever I want, because I'm not really having to answer to anyone. It was more the realization that there's another human being that is totally relying on, not totally relying on me, but you know what I'm trying to say,
Right.
has expectations of you
Yeah.
as a peer, not as like a parent to a child, but as a co-equal with you. Like you're expected to work as a team, and she's expecting you to fulfill certain things, and just being able to take care of things without having to be asked. And I think that was kind of my biggest realization in growing up, is that here's this other human that is relying on me to, again, to provide and protect and to cherish her, as our vows stated.
Yeah. And we've talked about when I was on your podcast, Jordan Peterson, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his, I think, rules for life is to treat yourself as if you're someone you're responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
So taking that, adopting it as your own, but then also extending it to the person closest to you, like the person that you marry, and how important is that? Like, I have all these things that I have to do to take care of myself. And like you said, not totally dependent, but you have someone who is dependent on you and who expects things of you, they expect you to take care of certain things in the relationship.
Without having to be asked.
Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Still learning that one, man. Without having to be asked.
The telepathy.
Yeah. What is your favorite thing about married life?
Yeah, I had to reflect on this a little bit. And I came up with truly giving your full self to another person and not having them judge you or reprimand you or blame you or make you feel guilty about something, but it's truly being vulnerable with another person that you are sharing everything with, and also growing with them too, is such an undervalued part of being married. I think is that, because I love my wife. I mean, my love I have for her now compared to when we got married 5 years ago is totally different, and it's a more mature love. Yeah. We always go through the, I'm sure you'll experience too, the honeymoon phase of when you're married, like everything's great. She's the most perfect human being ever. And then when that kind of veil goes down and you start realizing, okay, she has intricacies that actually kind of bother me. And she's not as perfect as I thought she was when we first got married. And, all these things. And I kind of told my wife too, when the honeymoon phase went away, I actually started to love her more just because I saw her as she truly was.
Yeah.
And this imperfect creature that I am bound to for life.
Yeah.
And it makes you appreciate another person and, how they have hopes, dreams, expectations. It just makes you look away from yourself so much more than when you were single, because you are literally sharing every single aspect of your life with this person, and you are being totally and completely vulnerable to them. And they're accepting you, and they chose to accept you for who you were, and they chose to say I do to a life, the rest of their life with you. I mean, it's powerful and it's profound. But yeah, just sharing that life experiences and growing with them and having a more mature love is probably the most favorite part for me.
Yeah, I think what I'm looking forward to the most is right along those lines, and also with what you said earlier too, like you're with this person for the rest of your life, and like not in a I can be lazy kind of way because I'm locked in, like I'm good, but like a comfortable type of way. Like this person is going to be with me, this woman is going to be by my side no matter what, and I'm going to be by her side no matter what. And yeah, I just think marriage and matrimony is just a really beautiful thing. Thanks again for tuning into the Modern Catholic Life podcast. For more content sharing the truth, beauty, and goodness of the Catholic faith, you can follow, like, and subscribe to our Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Facebook by searching @Modern Catholic Life. We'll see you next time.